I could certainly start us off. I'm Clovis Grant, and I have two kids, one who is 27, one who's 25. Our 25-year-old, our youngest, has autism, and it's been a journey for the last 21 years. Actually, it's been a journey for the last 25 years. The official diagnosis came when he was just before Christmas, when he was 4, but we knew there were issues before. But back to me, I'm in social services. I'm the CEO for a homeless organization in the New York region. So I do support young people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. And we've been married 30 years. I know, we're so young, but yet how do we be married for so long? And we are proud grandparents as well. A boy and a girl. I'm told it's $1 million family, so.
We're still looking for the $1 million.
But yes, they're lovely, and they're staying with us for the next little while. So a 3-year-old and a 8-month-old. She's 8 months right now. So you know, we all get along, and it's great to have that family support, especially for our youngest. His name is Isaiah, and he loves his family with him, although he loves his space as well, let's be honest, but nevertheless.
Yeah, so hi again, Usha. It's really great to be here with you and to share a little bit about our journey. So I'm Sherron Grant, and I'm currently a principal with the Toronto District School Board. I've been an educator for just over 16 years now, and currently at the K-6 school in Scarborough. And as Clovis says, it's been a very interesting journey, emotional at times. And so the volunteer work we do, well, I think the work we do that we're paid for, we hear a lot of stories and we meet a lot of families. And I think as a result of those experiences and conversations, we decide to take on some additional volunteer work again to provide those supports to families, supports that we kind of wish that we had throughout our journey. And I'm sure that, you know, throughout our conversation today, we'll share more with you about that.
So I want to take you back to, you know, your parents, a very young child, and what is it that was happening at that time that you thought, maybe I need to speak to a professional? Like, you know, what started that for you?
Good question. And having 2 kids is a blessing because you're able to watch and know milestones. So our oldest was fairly typical. So when our youngest came along and we weren't seeing some of those milestones, you know, he was crawling funny, and we sort of go, this is interesting. Not typical, because our oldest didn't do this. And the speech, now our oldest was slow to speak as well, but we thought, as our doctor said, he was a boy, and you know, boys are slow, so we thought, okay. He is still behind. And so we knew something was up, just not sure. And you would think that, you know, I'm in social services, I studied psychology, I knew about autism, but it just didn't register that could have been the journey. But we knew something was up, and you know, it's great to have a wife who, you know, it's like, okay, let's get on it. So,
and so to add to that, being in education is a second career for me. It was really important for us that I be home with the boys in their formative years. And so we made that sacrifice. So I was a stay-at-home parent at the time and running my own home daycare. And so that was another how can I say, standard that I could match Isaiah's development to, because I was taking care of other children who were the same age as him. So watching how they played with toys, watching how they interacted with each other, watching their social skill development. And Isaiah often tended to be on his own, doing his own thing. And we're a very social family, if you can't tell already. Always out and about. We're very, very much involved in our church. And so our son was also involved in the Sunday school program. Clovis and I were both teachers in the Sunday school program. So again, that was another place where, okay, you're with other children your age, but you're not developing the same way. And he just really didn't seem to have interest in playing with other children really outside of his brothers. So those are some of the red flags that we saw as parents. But I really give God thanks that a couple of our church sisters who as well were former educators also pointed out to me that, you know what, Sherron, perhaps you need to look into getting your son a developmental assessment. That was the first time we'd ever heard that term used, a full developmental assessment. Didn't know what it was, but we both knew, our senses were telling us there's something off with our son. If a developmental assessment is what he needs, then that's what I'm going to ask my doctor for. So one of the first things that I did was I started with speech and language pathology. And so in our local newspaper, The Mirror, which our son actually delivers for now, he's been delivering with them for about 5 years now. I was combing through the newspaper one day and I saw an article. Is your child speaking? Do they have any speech and language issues? And I'm like, oh, that's my boy. So I gave them a call. It was called TPAS, Toronto Preschool Speech and Language. And I signed up and I went with him for a few sessions. You get the book, you're with other parents, you learn some interventions and strategies. And I went home and I put those strategies into place. Putting words all over the kitchen and all over the house, and so that he can learn words and with picture symbols. Yes, Clovis remembers there was words everywhere. Getting dad involved, getting big brother involved, and anyone who came to the house. And we did that for, I would say, 2 years. So he was just over 2 when we started this, and we knew, okay, the speech isn't coming along. 2 years passed, and no, this isn't fixing it. There's something more here. And so again, in speaking with these 2 ladies at church, that was the beginning of the next leg of our journey. And
then did you go to your family doctor? How did that start?
Our family doctor, love him.
We love him.
With us for a long time. And back to my earlier comment that our oldest son was also a little bit slower in developing language. So he took care of our oldest. So he's taking care of our youngest, and said pretty much the same thing. That, you know, he's a boy, it'll come, but it didn't come. And fast forward with the story, even now he's somewhat incredulous that our child had autism, because it was just not something that was on his radar. And so he's grateful that we Sherron pushed to get more, because it was not the first thing on his mind that this could be a developmental
so it's
issue.
Like gender and, you know, other factors.
That's right. Now again, this is 21 years ago, and our knowledge, and I'm
yes,
sure
yes,
the knowledge of general practitioners
right.
is further along, but it was not on his radar. But we're grateful that he actually had the spirit and willingness to not obfuscate us, but to actually allow us to do whatever we needed to do to get the support. And so he gave us referrals, and I think we're grateful from
because sometimes that can happen, right? Gatekeeping.
You got it.
Well, I've seen that even in my profession as a school principal, I've had to really kind of take off my principal hat and put on my mom hat and say, no, it's your right. You are your child's best and most outspoken advocate. You are their first teacher. You are the expert when it comes to your child's needs. And you may have to push your doctor a little bit, and I had to. But again, just, you know, English is my first language, and I was educated here in Canada. We're both of Jamaican heritage, but we've had, you know, our parents brought us here when we were young, so we're able to grow up in the system here. So we're able to navigate and really, you know, step up and say what needs to be said and push and push for that change. But it takes a little bit of hand-holding with some of our families to do that, because some of the different insecurities and just maybe sensing that wall and not knowing that you do have the ability to push down that wall and fight through and get what your child needs.
So Sherron, can you walk me through from the time you made that appointment with the specialist for your son? How was it to make that appointment? How were you received as a family? Did you feel a sense of belonging, inclusion, and then going through the actual assessment and then to the diagnosis? Can you just kind of walk me through?
Sure. So the doctors, or our family doctor at the time, puts through the referral. And so it was at a clinic in Scarborough. There wasn't many clinics at that time that were giving out diagnoses, so we kind of knew them all by name. But this was one in Scarborough. So I remember our name went in onto the list, I think May of 2000. And then our name came up in November. And our son's birthday is in November, so that was his 4th year. He turned 4. And so he ended up in a diagnostic kindergarten at school because we didn't have an official diagnosis for him, but we knew that at that point. We just didn't want him in the regular program at that time. So November came up. It was kind of a blur because he had to be seen by a series of different specialists. I think we had to make sure to get his hearing checked and his vision checked. And there was a social worker and speech and language pathologist and developmental pediatrician. And I'm not even sure how many other people were involved. So I just remember it just being a lot of people, none of whom looked like me, talking a lot of big fancy words. So there was a lot of going home. I don't know if we had Google then. So it was just going home, going onto that internet and just looking stuff up. It's like, what was this? And what did they mean by this? And whatever the case may be. So there was a lot of that. I think it was about 3 days of full day appointments. And again, luckily I wasn't working. Well, I was, but I was working from home. And so, my schedule was quite flexible, so I could be there for that day. Clovis, had the type of job he needed to be at work. So I was there, took that time off, took him to those appointments. I remember, sitting in waiting rooms, and there's, always different little toys that Isaiah could play with and magazines for me to read, and looking around the room at other families there, getting their child looked at. But that was it. You're just kind of sitting in the room, just waiting for your name to be called to go into yet another appointment. I remember being asked many of the same questions over and over and over again. Like things that you don't think about when you have a child, like when they spoke their first word and what that first word was, and when they spoke their first sentence. And yes, milestones like when he walked and when he crawled and stuff like that, I remember. But there was a lot of very specific, minute details that I was taught, again, by other families who had been through it, that I started to meet along the way, to start making note, start keeping a record, because it got overwhelming and exhausting answering these things for these different people over and over and over again.
And that's with your educational background.
And that's with my educational background, exactly. I had my university degree. I didn't have my teaching degree yet, but I did have my 4-year university degree, but still very overwhelming and very emotional. Because when you're asked those questions over and over, you start to realize, and I'll hold it together, how far off the mark your child is. Because you realize, well, he didn't do this, or he still can't do this. And it just constantly bringing up those emotions of how abnormal, or how, I want to use proper words, but just how untypical or atypical, I love that show on Netflix, by the way, but how atypical my son was. And again, this is our second child, but he's 4, he's a baby, he's our baby. And we had never known of a child with autism until our son was diagnosed. So nevertheless, to keep going, so that was November, I believe it was 3 appointments, and then December 23rd, 2000, that was our Christmas present. We were called in, given our diagnosis of PDD-NOS, pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. And of course, I went home and Googled that, and
So that wasn't explained to you?
no.
Well, I think we understood that there was a classic definition. I believe at that point it was like 8 markers that, and he didn't fit all 8. So he had some of the traits, characteristics,
Right.
but he wasn't full blown. That's as much as we understood.
Yeah.
So nowadays we use the word autism, but back then it was PDD-NOS, and it was like, what is that?
Yeah, like some kids seem to get the automatic diagnosis of autism on the spot, and then others are getting PDD-NOS, and so so what does that mean? Like,
And in a sense, you sort of get a little bit of hope that maybe it's not as bad.
yes,
Because
true.
I knew autism through my education, and you hear about the catatonic, sitting in a corner, and that was
The very sort of severe.
very severe. So when I hear he's PDD-NOS, I thought, okay, well, it's not that, but I didn't know the spectrum. I don't think they understood the spectrum back then. So a little bit of hope, but really we knew, as Sherron said, something was awry, and we just didn't know really how awry it would be.
So you get a diagnosis, and then what? Was it, hi, Grants, please come back for a follow-up in 2 weeks. We're gonna sit down together and go through this, and here are the steps you're gonna go through?
We wish. I remember getting that sheet with about 2 or 3 paragraphs that we were to use to access services, financial resources, human resources, and so on. I remember getting a recommendation to connect with the Geneva Center for Autism, Variety Village for physical activity and different social skills groups, and maybe they had mentioned Community Living Toronto, and that was it. Best of luck.
The one thing that they did say, the developmental pediatrician said, get on waitlist. That was probably one of the most helpful comments, but really that was it. It was get on as many wait lists, and Sherron did just that, just got on every wait list or every list you could find, because we were now on a journey.
But at the same time, and this is something that we counsel our families with now, when you get that diagnosis, it's like a dark cloud has formed over your head. And it's almost on an opposite way. It's like when you bring home your newborn, so your first child for the first time, and you get into at least us, you get into your living room and you sit that child in their car seat down, you're like, oh my gosh, what do we do? Now what? Well, it's almost the same thing again, but on the opposite side of the emotional spectrum. It's like, now I've got this piece of paper in front of me that officially says what we feared all along, that our son has a disability that's going to affect him lifelong, and the path and life journey that we thought we were on, we've just been forced to detour. And it's just a blur of emotion. And although you're getting this advice to get on wait lists and contact this agency and that agency, you're stunned. You're just in shock.
So, even if you could have asked questions in that moment, would you have been able to?
No, didn't know what to ask.
You don't know what you don't know. Yeah. I'm sure we did, being the kinds of people we are, but we probably didn't ask what we needed to ask because we just needed to deal with that diagnosis. And then, not to knock the pediatrician completely, the doctor that finally gave us the diagnosis, then she left. I think she moved. I forget exactly if she was going to be taking the maternity leave, and then she didn't return to the clinic. So,
was your care transferred?
I don't think we went back to that clinic.
No.
I think after that it was the journey of the Geneva Center, the Surrey places, I don't remember all of the places, but it was
Yep.
going on that journey of learning
Yep.
and connecting and being on those wait lists for behavior, for speech, for
Yep.
OT, and that was the
Yeah.
journey. And we
Yeah.
knew that those were the deficits. Those are the areas that he needed to get support on. And then, by the time, we were dealing with the school system, we started seeing that there were a lot more things
Yeah.
that we needed to behavior. Did I mention behavior?
But was that how the diagnosis was presented to you? Did it feel that it was a deficit, that it felt like a life sentence, or was, hope given to you, or?
It was not hope. It was, your son is not progressing. And
might not ever. When, and I think this was before, again, my educator friends, or our educator friends from our church, I think they had indicated PDD and OS or autism. They'd use one of those words. So I was starting to do my own research, and I looked it up and what how it manifests, how it demonstrates itself. I'm like, okay, that's our son, check. That's our son, check. So when we walked into that appointment in December and got it officially from the team, we weren't surprised, but it was kind of the nail in the coffin. Sounds terrible, but it is the nail in the coffin. And so I remember coming home, and the other thing is, at that time, when you read online about autism, rarely was a prognosis positive. It was, they put the pressure on you about early years intervention. You can maybe mitigate some of the deficits, some of the challenges, some of the areas of need that your child may have. But it's all you saw was work and money, because you got to buy this and pay for this and wait list for that. Like, wait list is to get it for free, but while you're waiting, you don't want your child to continue to regress. So you find whatever money that you can. And so that was the thing. And then as I started to pick up books. There was Parent Books or Parent Bookstore downtown. It's now defunct, but oh my gosh, the amount of hundreds of dollars I spent, because again, I was saying to people, I was getting my PhD in autism. So anything and everything that was out there on autism, I picked up and I read and voraciously ate it up, because it's like, I'm not giving up on my child. I remember learning about Temple Grandin and hearing her speak and reading some of her books and articles and so on, and hearing her message of hope, that how she was written off by her doctors, but her mom said, nope, this is not happening, and fed everything into her. And even though we're not rich, we worked hard to get to where we are career-wise. Back then, we were one income, but we did whatever we needed to do and made whatever sacrifices that we needed to make to at least give our son something while we waited for his name to come up on those lists, because there's no way we could just sit down and watch.
So in all of your advocacy and your research and the books, did you see yourself represented as a Black family with the child that now has autism? Through the diagnostic process, through the specialists, through the literature?
No. One video, when you talk about the literature, one video, and this is Clovis alluded to this earlier, I'll never forget watching. I believe I was down at the Geneva Center, and it was a video about autism and the journey and so on. And there was a Black woman, and I don't know, and it's probably irrelevant anyways, the functioning level of her child, because our son, now I'm hearing that, when a child is diagnosed with autism, they're given a level 1, 2, or 3. So that's new. That wasn't around when our son was diagnosed 21 years ago. But, we wouldn't say he's the highest functioning. He's somewhat in the middle of the stream. He's got some great independent skills, but his language and communication skills are definitely challenged. And I remember watching this video with this Black woman, I believe she was African American, and how she had to fight to get her son a diagnosis, because at that time they thought that autism only afflicted white families or white presenting families, and her son couldn't have autism because he's Black. And I remember sitting there crying and feelings of anger and sadness and isolation, thinking, oh my gosh, like, that's ridiculous. So no, that was probably the only connection that I had as a Black woman, was that woman in that video. Otherwise, very few families at the different parent groups and parent information nights I attended. As for professionals, no, white presenting individuals.
And what, just thinking about it, what do you think that could have added the value of having representation when you were going through this? And now, would it have made a difference? Would it have helped in an emotional capacity in any way?
There is always a connection when you see somebody who looks like you. You're in a sea in our community, in our city, where you're deemed a visible minority. So you're used to being a minority, and certainly we know the demographics, and often Black people aren't in those professional circles, and so you're almost lulled to accept that reality, and so to be able to see an OT or an SLP, and I won't even go to the route of a psychologist, but it would bring some level of, oh, you know what, I can talk to this person, versus, and again, not a slam on the profession, but it's a very clinical, very, I don't know the right word, but it's just you and me, and there is no bond. It's almost like that's the way it's set up to be. Whereas and right now we do have physicians who, actually our son's current physician is Black. And it's such a difference because there is this connection that happens and that rapport, that it's not as clinical.
Yeah.
And so I think it would certainly make a difference, and especially for bridging that gap between the professionals, the physicians, and the diagnostic folks, and the people, especially getting that diagnosis. It could bring down the stress, it could bring down the anxiety.
Yes.
But it's just yet another barrier, and the cultural barrier is one that we shouldn't ignore.
Because the language wasn't the barrier for you.
No, it's we talk about bedside manner, right? When we talk about the medical field and how that can make the medicine go down so much easier, right? And I think, as Clovis was saying, as I was going through the appointments and through the process, you kind of start to feel like a number. Although that may not have been the intent of the team, that was the impact. And you feel like, okay, we just need to get you through because there's wait lists, there's a lot of kids that need to get diagnosed. We don't have time to sit down and talk with you. Let's get through this. This is a classical case. Here's some numbers of some agencies. Here's your diagnosis. This is your credit card to get access. Goodbye, let's move on to the next number. We, as an African peoples, and I'm sure that this is common in many cultural groups, non-Westernized cultural groups, we're very oral. We're very interpersonal. We like and need to talk things out. There was an opportunity to do that. As I shared earlier, we had never met someone, at least someone that we knew of, on the autism spectrum. I mean, growing up in school, there was children who had different types of developmental disabilities or perhaps neurological challenges, but sadly they were at a wing at the other end of the school, right? And you might see them the odd time at recess. It wasn't the inclusion model that we see today. So where I'm going with this is, you're not really in contact with persons living with a disability. And unfortunately, in certain cultures, and I'll speak about our Black culture, we don't talk about disability openly. We're not necessarily taking them to places of worship. We're not necessarily taking them to family get-togethers, depending on the family, because family don't understand. Sometimes we don't understand because we don't have those outside professional supports. So you take them to church, something is said, you're offended, you don't bring your loved one back to church again. You take them to a family get-together, again, something is said in ignorance, you try to educate, it doesn't work, you don't bring them back to that family get-together, and maybe you don't get together with your family again for some time. Those are things I wish I had opportunity to speak to someone, be like, how do I share this with my family? How do I share this with my partner? Because we know many is the cases, it's the mom who's going through this, or perhaps grandma or auntie who's that main caregiver. How do I now share this with my partner? How do I share this now with my family, with my church family? What advice can you give me? Conversations like that would have helped, one or two follow-up conversations after diagnosis, just to get me on my way, rather than this cold, okay, we've given you what you need, move on. You contact these agencies. We've met families who, that's just too much for them. They need, just to get them, they need that hand holding. Yeah, it could have made a huge difference. Just that cultural responsiveness, that sensitivity, that understanding of how different groups of people deal with these kinds of situations or don't deal with these kinds of situations, and how we can turn this around.
And parents learn so much from parents. So even something like a parent group, which is what we started, helps parents to understand, okay, I get it. Yeah. And this is what we need to do. It's one thing to hear it from professionals,
right,
but professionals don't live it and they don't understand some of the nuances. Hearing it from a parent. So even being connected to a parent group or peer workers or whatever label you want to put on it, but while you're waiting, there are some things that you could get in the meantime to really help you understand what else you could be doing, how else you could be thinking, because there are families who their marriage breaks down because of that diagnosis. There are families where one or both parents go into depression of some sort, and rather than getting the support that they need, that early intervention, guess what? That child is delayed even further because it is just a big baseball bat to the head. You know.
So on that line of thought, tell us about your organization, what it's called, how it started, why you started it, and sort of what you do.
Well, it's called Sawubona, Africentric Circle of Support. And I'll get my wife to talk about it a little bit more, because really it was her brainchild because of the experiences she had going to groups and some of the what she saw and what she didn't see,
so as we've shared, we've been on this journey for 21 years now, and so one of the first things I did come the new year after diagnosis was to join a parent support group. And it was one of the best things that I ever did, because again, even though I was in a space where the other parents didn't look like me, we did have that common experience and we had that common language. And so that really provided me a lot of emotional support and provided me a lot of those initial ideas of these wait lists to get on, how to advocate for our son in the school system, with the financial resources, with the ministries and so on, to get our son the supports that he needed. But I often noticed I was the only, or maybe one of only a handful of other racialized persons with other cultural makeup. And we're not strictly of a Western white presenting group. And so I went, and sometimes I would sit at these groups and we talk about issues, a big one being the school system. Because unfortunately, when a Black child is behavioral, it's too often labeled the child is pathologized or their family is pathologized and they're perhaps put on an individual education plan, but it's not helping that child get better. It's really just keeping them where they're at, but keeping them kind of satisfied and quiet in a corner. And we've got to turn that around. So I saw that, I experienced that, but I couldn't engage in those conversations when I was in those parent groups because that was not the experience of those parents. And sometimes when I tried to broach that topic, the person leading that group perhaps didn't know how to broach the topic themselves, so it just kind of got worked around. And so I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna push, I'm not gonna come over here and hijack the meeting. I'll just sit quiet and learn what I can and take what I can and move from there. So I did those groups for a few years, and I did try to advocate for, more culturally relevant, responsive ways of dealing with different communities. Because again, I'm sitting on boards of directors and leadership councils and going to focus groups and so on. I'm looking around the room and okay, I know that there's other Black children and South Asian children and East Asian children and so on who are on the autism spectrum because I see them when I take my son to social skills groups. I see them when I take my son to programs at Variety Village. I see the children, but when I go to the parent groups, I'm not seeing the families. I took a break for a few years. Came back when Isaiah was in his teenage years. All right, let's start going to these parent groups again. Why am I seeing the same looking families represented? Where? Years later. I'm like, the pattern hadn't changed. It's like, okay, there's a few more faces. I go to different fundraising events in the city, for autism and so on. And again, okay, there's a few families there and there's a few families there, but I'm not seeing them involved. I'm not seeing them at the groups. I'm not seeing them getting involved in the focus groups where their voice could be heard. I'm not seeing them at the table. So I started saying to Clovis years ago, man, honey, someone needs to start a group. And but I kept saying someone. And I'd meet other families and we'd say to each other, yeah, someone needs to start a group. But it never got started. Not by any of us as families, and unfortunately not by any of the agencies either. And then now fast forward, the last few years, I did start to see groups formed for, let's say, French-speaking parents, so families, French-speaking families, and Mandarin Cantonese-speaking families. And then I saw SAAAC, the South Asian Autism Awareness Center group, starting to pick them like, oh my gosh, that's fantastic. But I'm still looking for something for Black families because we too have specific needs to our culture. And I never saw it happen. And then I finally decided, okay, 2020 is the year. I went away to a mom's retreat and there was a few Black moms there. And that was the first time I'd ever gone to an event like that where, oh my gosh, there was like maybe 6 or 7 of us in a space of maybe 30 moms. And it was fantastic. And we all again said, you know what, when we go back, someone needs to start a group. Well, I guess that someone was me. And so we started off thinking to ourselves, okay, we'll just reach out to a few families that I know that I've met over the years and just start off small, a few families, virtually or in our living room. And we just come together to connect and to talk on a real level as Black people, whether we're from the continent, Canadian, North American, from the Caribbean, but we have that experience in common as being Black presenting people. And then an article, so a mutual friend connected us with Holland Bloorview, and a staff person there wrote a blog about our experience with our son and our goal to start a Black parent support group for parents, regardless of the diagnosis of their child, although the majority of our families, I must admit, do have children on the autism spectrum, but regardless of the diagnosis of the child or the age of your loved one, so from 2 to 42, you're welcome to join. Well, I think our first meeting, we had 40 families online, and now we're at over 160 families between our email list and our Facebook group, which the families aren't necessarily the same, and but they share. It's a breath of fresh air. It's something that's been needed for a long time. an affinity group where we can come together and be our authentic selves. We can speak in whatever our tongue or slang that we need to speak.
Your language.
You know?
Honesty where they felt somewhat hindered.
Yes.
You hear that a lot, where they feel like they can't say the wrong thing because it would be misconstrued or misunderstood. And there's just that fear of being honest and open, and that really that voice, that safe space that was talked about. So we hear that constantly, and it's affirming to them that their experiences were not unique, because I think what happens is in small ways they're experiencing these micro and sometimes macro aggressions. And they think nothing of it, but then they start talking to others and hearing it, and it's like, you too? Yes. And that's affirming. And so that then a year later, they're getting their voices. We're seeing them wanting to take on more leadership opportunities with the group. And so it's amazing when you give people the opportunity to have their voice heard. Yes. They will use it. But some, you still need to encourage them, because they have been beaten down so much. Sadly, and we know then that means their child or children will suffer as a result. And so that's what we're seeing as the need, and that's our commitment to working with the families.
It's really beautiful. I could keep talking to both of you forever, but as a final comment to families, who are going to be watching, who are listening and thinking, oh hey, that's me. I identify with that. What's something you would say to them, like a message or just a takeaway that you want them, to leave with them?
I would say to families, two things. One, you are most certainly not alone. And secondly, get involved, because you do have a voice, and your voice is so critical for the help of your child, but also for you to know that you indeed are not alone.
There's so much I could say, but I guess what comes to my mind is, and I do say this to a lot of families at my school, with our group, stay in the battle. It is a battle. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You do have to pick up your armor, and this is somewhat of a spiritual reference. And you have what it takes. That was one of the biggest reasons why we started this group, and why this group has been on my heart for so long, because I know that racism and classism and ableism has knocked people down for far too long. And we have to interrupt it, we have to disrupt it, we have to call it out. And this is what we're trying to empower. And that's part of our tagline, is to empower, to educate, and enlighten our community and the communities that we connect with. Our families, you mom, you dad, you grandma, you grandpa, auntie, uncle, big brother, big sister, whoever the caregiver is involved in that loved one's life, you've got what it takes right inside of you. So as Clovis says, get involved, reach out, connect with other like-minded people so you can band together to continue on this journey from a source of strength, not from a source of weakness or inferiority. You've got everything that you need right inside here. We're nothing special, honestly. We're just a couple of, well, I was born in England, but we're just, Jamaican kids here who just had on our hearts to make a difference. We've been strengthened when we see the resilience and the strength in our son and how far he's come. That inspires us to want to do the work that we're doing, and you too can do the same. So that would be the message.
And Sawubona means we see you, and that really sums it up in terms of these families. We see you, we know that you exist, and you can in fact do it.
Yes.
but they need the inspiration.